Welcome to BL Stories, where romance, drama, and unforgettable boys' love come to life. Love knows no limits, and the best stories aren't always straight. Subscribe now and join our growing BL-loving family. Jasper and Xander have taken a significant step in their relationship by making it official, although this new status remains a secret known only to them. Meanwhile, Jasper's best friend, Hayden, is unaware of their relationship and begins to develop unexpected feelings for Jasper. This development introduces additional tension, as Jasper finds himself struggling to navigate his relationship with Xander while also managing the evolving dynamic with Hayden. Ultimately, Jasper must confront the complexities of his situation and make decisions regarding both his relationship with Xander and his friendship with Hayden. Chapter 1. Welcome back to a new week. The intercom announced in the science building, drawing groans from the students who reluctantly shuffled into class. I was no exception. Honestly, I had zero motivation to show up today. I'd been feeling a bit under the weather. But my roommate, Dre, wouldn't let me off the hook. He practically dragged me out of bed. Jesus, Dre, I groaned, holding my throbbing head. Can't you just fill me in later? No can do, he replied, pushing his glasses up his nose. You can't afford to skip class. Remember that 31 you got. Ah, shut it, I waved him off. It was a one-time thing. And it's about to become a two-time thing, Dre said. So, get your lazy butt up and let's go. I sighed. You just want to go see May, don't you? That's why you're in such a rush. Dre grinned. Of course, my sweet May is waiting for me. Doubt it, I muttered, pushing myself up. Getting ready didn't take long, and we headed to the science building, just a 5-minute walk from our dorm. We shared the same biomechanics class, which, conveniently, meant I could lean on Dre to help me survive the semester. As soon as we sat down, someone slid in beside me. Hey guys, the voice greeted softly. Hey Hayden, Dre replied. I turned to Hayden and offered a small smile. How've you been? I asked, waiting for the professor to arrive. Hayden's smile lit up his whole face. Great. Good to see you. I laughed. We just saw each other a few days ago. It feels longer, he said with a grin. Soon, the professor entered, cutting our conversation short. Normally, I would have minded, but today my mind wasn't fully in class anyway. Hayden was just another friend to me, or so I thought. The class dragged on endlessly. My mind wandered, as it often did, to someone else, someone with mesmerizing green eyes. Finally, class ended. I couldn't leave fast enough, and Dre's eyes widened in surprise. Why are you in such a rush? He asked, hurriedly gathering his things. Going to see Lover Boy or something? Whoa, Hayden interjected. Lover Boy? Crap. Hayden didn't know about my relationship with Xander yet, and I wasn't ready to tell him. I forced a nervous laugh and shot Dre a glare. He raised his hands in mock surrender, eyes wide behind his glasses. Only kidding, he stammered, quickly standing up. Hayden chuckled. I hope so. I decided not to press further. I had somewhere to be. Well, I'll catch you guys later, I said, leaving them behind. My heart raced as I navigated the long hallway toward the library. Once there, I looked around the first floor. No sign of him. Figures, he was always late. I tossed my backpack onto a table and rested my head on it, closing my eyes. Moments later, I heard a soft thud as books were set down across from me. I lifted my head and rubbed my eyes. It's about time, I said, grinning at him. He smirked, reaching his hand across the table. Missed me? Xander asked, and I rolled my eyes. Yeah, right, I said, eyeing his hand. What are you doing? He slid his fingers through mine. Seem familiar? Heck, I muttered, remembering the time I'd done the same thing with Hayden. You'll never let me live that down, will you? Xander laughed, leaning back in his chair. Nah, it was cute. Shut up, I said, pulling out my notebook. Now help me with my homework. He raised an eyebrow. I'll help, only if you come with me somewhere after. I sighed. Where? You'll see, he replied with a smirk. Chapter 2. Jesus, Xander sighed, resting his cheeks in his hands with his elbows on the table. You still don't pay attention in class. At this rate, you'll never finish these problems. I put down my pencil and narrowed my eyes at him. I'm trying, I said. Maybe if someone helped a little more, I'd finish faster. Xander tilted the paper toward himself and began walking me through the steps. I tried my best to follow along, but half of it felt like a foreign language. All right, he asked, tapping the paper. Now your turn. I muttered under my breath, glancing at the page. My hand moved slowly, writing down random numbers. I didn't have the courage to admit I hadn't really listened. Sweat started forming on my palms as Xander pulled out his phone, completely unaware of my silent struggle. Have you finished yet? He asked, peeking at my page. I brushed my hand over the unfinished section at the bottom. Yeah, I'm done. I quickly shoved the page into my folder and zipped my backpack closed. Good, Xander said, grinning as he stood. Let's go. I followed him out of the library and tried to ask where we were headed, but he refused to tell me. Instead, he led me to his car. Honestly, I didn't care. I was just glad to spend time with him. Once he started driving, he adjusted the radio. I noticed a missed call from Dre on my phone. Pressing it, I turned the volume down as Xander raised an eyebrow, his focus still on the road. After a few rings, Dre picked up. Jasp, he breathed. I need. Is it May? I asked, grinning. How'd you know? Dre asked, sounding flustered. Looks like I'm the new god of love, I joked, referencing something Dre had said before. I wouldn't doubt it, he admitted. But you've got to help me, Jasp. She's coming over. Xander chuckled quietly, having put the call on speaker. To our dorm? I asked. Yes, Dre replied. What should I do? You'd better not pull out those books, I warned. Just be yourself and make her feel welcome. You'll be fine. Are you coming back soon? He asked. Before I could answer, Xander snatched my phone from my hand. Jasper won't be coming back tonight, he said into the phone, smirking. Have fun with May. He hung up and tossed the phone back to me. I fumbled to grab it, looking at him in surprise. I won't be going back to my dorm tonight? I asked. Not tonight, Xander replied. You're supposed to be Dre's wingman. I frowned. And where exactly am I supposed to stay? That won't be necessary, he interrupted. Just stay over at my place. My face heated up, and he laughed softly. Okay, I stammered, instantly regretting it. But when are you going to tell me where we're going? Xander took a right turn and pulled into a parking lot in front of a bar. He unbuckled his seatbelt and I followed suit, curious. Why Winston's? I asked as we climbed out. You ask too many questions, Jasper, he said, smiling and brushing his shoulder lightly against mine as he held the door. Just let loose tonight, he added. It's rare we get a night like this. He was right. With the chaos of finals, assignments, and constant studying, I hadn't had a proper break in weeks. Even one night of fun felt like a gift. Inside, music thumped from the speakers, vibrating through the dimly lit bar. Xander scanned the room, and I grabbed his elbow. What are you looking for? I whispered. He leaned in, close enough that I could feel his warmth. Some friends from high school, he said. Oh, then why did you bring me? Xander's green eyes sparkled as he replied, because I wanted to spend time with you. I sighed, unable to argue with that. Social situations outside my own friend group weren't my forte, but I'd do my best, for him. Xander, a voice called from across the room. I spun around to see a group gathered around a pool table. Some were playing, others chatting. Xander waved, and a blonde-haired guy with curly hair approached, slapping him playfully on the back. It's been a while, man, the guy said with a warm smile, his blue eyes catching mine. I know, Kaysen, Xander replied, stepping aside so I could be seen. Jasper, Xander said, grinning. My boyfriend. Chapter 3. The light blonde boy raised an eyebrow, his blue eyes briefly scanning me before returning to Xander. A corner of his mouth lifted into a playful grin as he rubbed his chin, as if sizing me up. I found the gesture a little odd, maybe even slightly rude. Is that so? Kaysen said, turning back to Xander. He's a good-looking one. Xander grinned and casually draped an arm around my shoulders, leaning in slightly. I stumbled a bit but caught myself, supporting his weight without thinking. That's right, Xander said, glancing around at the rest of his friends, who had gathered after noticing his return. Most of them wore wide, welcoming smiles. I could tell it must have been bittersweet for Xander to see his old friends again. High school had never been a pleasant time for me, so I couldn't relate. How's your daughter? Kaysen asked, tilting back his beer. Xander shrugged. She's great, he replied, then turned his attention to a game of pool a few of his friends were playing. I followed him to the table, and Kaysen trailed behind us. Kaysen was easy on the eyes, and he hadn't stopped smiling since we arrived. Judging by the way he kept glancing at Xander, I guess they had been close back in high school. When we reached the table, the current game ended, and we were handed pool cues. Let's play doubles, Xander said. Losers buy the next round of drinks. Deal, Kaysen replied, and I nodded silently. I still felt a little out of place, but Xander stayed close, and I felt my tension ease. We called over another of Xander's friends to round out the teams. Somehow, I ended up on the opposite team from Xander, while Kaysen paired with him. I sighed and introduced myself to the lanky, freckled guy on my team. I'm not very good at pool, I admitted. He chuckled. Neither am I, he said. We'll figure it out together. He took the first shot, carefully aiming before breaking the balls with a satisfying clack. One of the solid-colored balls dropped into a pocket. Solids, he said with a grin before taking his next turn. I quietly cheered him on and waited for Xander to step up. Xander crouched to eye level with the table, carefully considering his shot. Kaysen laughed. Quit pretending you're a pro. We know better. Shut up, Xander joked, gripping the cue awkwardly. Kaysen leaned over, adjusting Xander's hand positioning. I couldn't help but notice how close they were, and I felt a little flutter in my chest. Try this, Kaysen said. Xander followed his tip and managed to sink a striped ball into a pocket. He high-fived Kaysen, and I let out a small breath as I prepared for my turn. I knew I probably wouldn't make a ball, so my goal was simple, just hit one. I copied the hold Kaysen had shown Xander and lined up my shot. I pulled back and pushed forward, but only grazed the cue ball. It rolled away without touching another ball. Don't worry about it, Rocco said, patting my back with an encouraging grin. It wasn't the missed shot that bothered me, it was the uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. I pushed the thought aside and continued playing. The game ended quickly. Kaysen and Xander won, which meant Rocco and I had to buy drinks for them. I got my own as well, and we rejoined the group. I listened to the stories Xander's friends shared, fascinated by his high school life. They described him as quieter back then, shy even, which was hard to believe. He had always been diligent, helping anyone in need, a trait I now recognized in him clearly. Then one comment made my breath catch, and I looked at Xander. I always thought Kaysen and Xander would have ended up together, someone said. Xander shook his head with a small laugh, and I felt a mix of relief and curiosity swirl inside me. Chapter 4. Like hell, Xander said, shaking his head. That's ridiculous. Ouch, Kaysen joked, placing a hand on his heart and grinning. Xander frowned at him. We were best friends back then, Kaysen. You know that. Yeah, Kaysen said, leaning back in the booth. Wish we could go back. I don't, Rocco interjected. I was a total mess back then. The table laughed, reminiscing about the past, and I awkwardly joined in. I wished I could contribute more, but I stayed quiet, offering small smiles whenever Xander glanced my way. I didn't want to disrupt his reunion. Then, a warm hand slid into mine, and I quickly looked down, eyes widening as I met Xander's gaze. He leaned closer and whispered, "Wanna go?" I wanted to, but I didn't want to push him if he wasn't ready. Not if you don't want to, I said, squeezing his hand gently. Without another word, Xander stood and pulled me up, draping his jacket over his shoulders. Well, it was great seeing you all again, he said to his friends. Let's do this again soon. They all agreed, and we slipped out into the chilly night. Xander rubbed his hands together for warmth as we drove the short distance back to his house. Sorry I dragged you out tonight, he said after a few moments of silence. I just wanted you to have a good time. I did, I assured him. Don't worry about it. He muttered something under his breath, and I didn't question it. I was too tired to focus as we pulled into his driveway. We walked slowly to the front door, the cold wind stinging my cheeks. Xander stopped at the door, and I noticed he hadn't pulled out his keys. Instead, he turned to me, his emerald eyes locking on mine. I inhaled sharply as he stepped closer, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. My heart raced. Thanks for coming, Jasper, he said softly, smiling. Why yeah, I whispered, still catching my breath. He led me inside, and I followed him upstairs. Soon, a bedroom door opened, and a girl around my age stepped out, arms folded and lips pressed into a thin line. Xander didn't say a word as he carefully picked up a sleeping child in his arms. I remembered her name was Hadley. Seeing her asleep in her father's arms was a tender, heartwarming moment. My attention was pulled back when Xander's sister, Paisley, glanced at me. What are you doing here? She asked, eyes narrowing. I sighed. We'd never gotten along, though we'd exchanged only a few words over the years. I'm staying the night, I said, following Xander into his bedroom. He laid Hadley in her crib and collapsed on his bed. Noticing I hadn't moved, he patted the space beside him. I walked over, raising an eyebrow. He lifted the blanket and said simply, "Get in." Exhaustion won over, and I didn't resist. I lay down beside him, and he draped an arm across me and tucked a leg over mine. I smiled and ran a hand through his hair as we drifted off to sleep. Crying stirred me awake in the early morning. I rubbed my eyes and yawned as Xander groggily got up to tend to Hadley, feeding her and changing her diaper. When he returned, I told him I had to get back to my dorm and get ready for class. He offered to drive me, but I declined. The walk was short. See you later, I said. He reached out, and I pulled him into a warm hug before heading outside. By the time I reached my dorm, Dre was still fast asleep. I tiptoed to my bed and froze, because May was asleep in his bed too. Chapter 5. I grinned to myself as I looked away from the sleeping pair, quietly congratulating my roommate. Maybe he had done well, and perhaps May genuinely liked him. I was happy for him. Careful not to wake anyone, I slowly opened my drawers and pulled out a change of clothes before heading to the bathroom to freshen up. As I brushed my teeth, my phone lit up, and my hand froze mid-motion. It was a call from my father, the man who had always fallen short of the role he was supposed to play in my life. He hadn't checked in with me in a while, and I wondered if he had truly changed. I didn't have high hopes. I assumed this would be another obligatory call prompted by his own guilt. Of course, I hadn't reached out either, but I had convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. If he didn't care enough, I wouldn't force the connection. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I rinsed my mouth, wiped my hand across my face, and answered the call. "Dad?" I sighed. "Jasper," he replied, his voice raspy as always. "How are you doing?" "Fine," I said, gathering my things. "Another one of your check-ins, I take it?" He exhaled slowly. "No. I'm calling to update you on me." I stepped out of the bathroom, ducking my head as I bumped into something solid. A quiet apology escaped me. I remembered my roommate was still asleep, and I retreated to the lounge. "You're not stumbling over here drunk again, are you?" I asked cautiously. "No," my father said. "I've been going to therapy to help me cope with your mother's passing, and I haven't been drinking like I used to." "Good for you," I said, though a part of me doubted he could resist his old habits for long. "Are you coming home?" he asked. I placed a hand against my forehead, realizing he was genuinely trying. My father was the only family I had left, and I wasn't ready to push him away. "I'll think about it, Dad," I said, relieved the conversation was going better than usual. "Good," he replied. "I'll see you soon." I ended the call and leaned back in the chair. Maybe I would go home. I hadn't seen him in over a year, and the thought of reconnecting with him stirred something I hadn't felt in a long time. By the time I returned to my room, Dre and May were awake, packing their backpacks for class. I offered a small wave and introduced myself to May. She smiled softly. Her long, dark hair framed her face, and her gentle demeanor made me glad that Dre had met someone like her. I smirked at Dre, and he returned the gesture with a grin. As they left, I patted my roommate lightly on the back. He glanced over and mouthed, "Thank you." I saluted him in response before closing the door. The day dragged on without my friends in class. My mind kept wandering back to my father. After a long day of zoning out in lectures, I made my decision. I was going home. Once my last class ended, I packed up and caught a bus home. The familiar streets felt strangely nostalgic. I rang the doorbell, and after a few moments, my father appeared. His eyes filled with tears. He hadn't expected me. Seeing him so fragile made a lump rise in my throat. A tear escaped my eye as he pulled me into a tight hug. My arms wrapped around him slowly, and we stayed like that until I patted his back gently and he released me. "Good to see you," he said, wiping his eyes. I did the same, scanning the house for any sign of alcohol. There was none. We sat on opposite couches, and he asked about school, friends, and everything in between as if no time had passed. It felt good. I found myself wanting to open up. I had held so much in for so long, and I knew this was the moment to release it. When the inevitable question about relationships came up, I felt my heart race. I picked at my fingernail nervously, gathering the courage I had buried for years. "Dad," I said softly. He looked at me, waiting. "I'm gay." Chapter 6. My father pursed his lips for a moment, and my heart sank as I braced for disapproval. He folded his hands in his lap, studying me carefully before finally speaking. "Okay," he said. "I'm glad you felt comfortable telling me, Jasper." Now, his voice trailed and I felt my palms grow sweaty. "Had he accepted me? What can I do to support you?" he asked, and my eyes immediately welled up. I hadn't expected such a positive response. Through a few tears, I smiled at him. "Just be there for me, Dad. And for Xander." "Xander?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," I said. "He's my boyfriend." "Oh," my father said, smiling warmly. "Of course, Jasper. Bring him by sometime. I'd love to meet him." I nodded, wiping away my tears for the second time since arriving. My father stood and bent down, hugging me again. I couldn't believe how much he had changed, and a wave of happiness washed over me, one I hadn't felt in a long time. The hours that followed were filled with catching up, watching TV, and even sharing a meal he had made himself. When it was time to leave, I told him I had to return to school and finish up some assignments. He wished me luck, unaware that I still had to redo the math homework I had scribbled nonsense on. I left with a smile, in a better mood than I had expected. By the time I returned to school, it was around 9 at night, and I collapsed onto my bed. Dre spun around in his chair, eyes narrowing suspiciously. "You've been gone a while," he said. "Cupid senses, maybe a date?" I laughed, sitting up. "And this is why you're not Cupid." "I wish it were a date." "Then you were with Hayden?" he asked. "No," I said. "I went to see my father." "Oh," Dre said, concern flashing across his face. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," I replied. "Thanks for worrying." He grinned. "Of course." I stretched my arms toward the ceiling, thinking about how eventful Dre's night must have been. "Hey," I said, noticing he was closing his textbook. "Hey," he replied, hopping onto his bed with his laptop. "Aren't you going to fill me in about last night?" I asked, smirking. The tips of his ears turned red, and he buried his face in his hands. "I haven't stopped thinking about it," he admitted. "I kissed her." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" He peeked at me through his fingers. "And?" he repeated. "That's it." I asked. "What? Yeah," he said. "Then we went to sleep." "Cute," I teased, laughing. "Congratulations." "Thank you," he said. "Your turn." "Huh?" I asked. "You spent the night with lover boy," he said, wiggling his eyebrows. I sighed. "Yeah. Same old, same old." "Gimme the details," he said, rubbing his hands together. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you had a thing for Xander," I said. Dre laughed, grabbed his pillow, and playfully threw it at me. I sent it right back at him, hitting his arm. "Watch it," I warned. If you waste too much time throwing pillows, you're going to lose your top rank in class. Oops, he said, turning back to his laptop. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through social media until it rang. It was Hayden. Hey, what's up? I answered. Dre glanced over, opening his mouth to reply, but closed it when he realized I was on the phone. Why are you laughing? Hayden asked. Dre thought I was talking to him, I said, chuckling. Anyway, what are you up to tomorrow? Nothing much, Hayden said. You and Dre should stop by in the evening. Brian's cooking a ton of food, and we'll invite a few friends. I glanced at Dre, still typing, and decided for both of us. We'll be there, I said. Dre gave me a questioning look but shrugged. Awesome, Hayden replied. See you then. After ending the call, I filled Dre in on the plan. He grinned. Can't wait to see what drama happens this time. Hopefully none, I said, lying back on my bed. Before drifting off, I sent Xander a quick text asking if he would be joining us tomorrow evening. His reply was a bit disappointing. Sorry, I've got plans with Kaysen and the others. Chapter 7. Morning arrived far too quickly, and I seriously considered skipping my first class. I might have too, if Xander hadn't been in it. At this point, he was the only reason I even showed up. I didn't care much about the subject matter, I just wanted to see his face. Of course, I arrived early and took a seat in the middle of the classroom, resting my head on my desk for a little shut-eye. I remembered how I had taken his seat the first day we met and smiled to myself, glad I had. If not, I might never have met the rude bastard I had fallen for. Soon, a tap on my shoulder made me lift my head and I froze. A pair of beautiful emerald eyes met mine, and the boy grinned. My heart skipped a beat, and I returned the smile. Don't have too much fun without me tonight, Xander said, leaning back in his chair. Believe me, I sighed. I won't. Especially not, since I knew he'd be hanging out with Kaysen. Xander laughed and nudged my shoulder lightly. Why's that? You love hanging out with Hayden. I wanted to ask if it bothered him that I'd be with Hayden tonight, but I stayed quiet, holding on to my pride. He obviously wasn't thinking that way, or at least, I hoped he wasn't. Yeah, I said, sighing. I guess. Have fun with your friends. Xander frowned. It didn't sound like you meant that. I didn't. I did, I lied, forcing a smile. They're interesting people. He narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced, but our math professor arrived just in time. The lecture flew over my head. I couldn't stop thinking about Xander and Kaysen. I knew I was overthinking things, and I cursed myself for being so neurotic. I hated feeling this way. So, when class ended, I grabbed Xander's hand and pulled him into a quiet corner just outside the classroom. He looked down at me, eyebrow raised, but I simply reached up and pressed my lips to his. His eyes closed instantly, and he brought a hand to my cheek. Warmth spread through me, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. I just needed reassurance. He smiled against my lips, and I traced my hand down his arm, holding on to him. He leaned closer and I felt my heart race. We pulled back just long enough to share a soft smile, foreheads resting together. Jasper, he whispered, tugging lightly at my hand. We're not done. Later, I returned to my dorm after classes and found Dre hunched over his desk, working hard. You ready? I asked, tossing my backpack beside my bed. Huh. He closed his textbook and looked up. All right. We're going to Hayden's. Why are you more excited than I am? I teased as we left the dorm. Hayden's just more interesting now, Dre said with a grin. I didn't question it. We arrived at Hayden's a little after 7. His mom answered the door, welcoming us with warm hugs. Dre's face got squished into my shoulder, making me laugh, while we looked for Hayden. He was in the basement, seated on the couch, watching a boxing match. He waved us over. Hey guys, he said, scooting over. Sit while we wait for dinner. I sat beside him, with Dre on my other side, and glanced around. Is anyone else coming? I asked. Nope, Hayden replied. Xander's with high school friends, and everyone else is loaded with assignments. I nodded and focused on the match. Dre nudged me and whispered, Where's the bathroom? I told him it was upstairs, to the right of the kitchen. He dashed off immediately, fast as ever. It must have been urgent, but I didn't bother thinking too much. Dre was always up to something. Once we were alone, Hayden turned to me, eyes curious. "Can I ask you something?" he said, and I looked at him, waiting. Chapter 8. Hayden and I had never really talked about relationships, love lives, or anything close to that. Even when he started dating Paisley, it was the first time he ever hinted at anything romantic. As for me, I never opened up to him. It was an unspoken boundary we both understood, until that day. I still hadn't told him about what was happening between Xander and me. I didn't know how to explain it, and honestly, I wasn't sure I was ready. But Hayden, in his own quiet way, brought the truth closer than I expected. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I leaned back against the couch, arms resting behind my head, wondering what he wanted. Maybe he needed help with the biomechanics report, but he'd never come to me for that. "Yeah," I said. "What's up?" He looked down at his hands, avoiding my eyes. That alone was unusual. "It's just," he began, "I know we don't usually talk about this stuff, but I can't stop thinking about it." I frowned. "About what?" He let out a heavy sigh. "Is there someone you're interested in?" My eyes widened, my heartbeat instantly picking up. So much for avoiding the topic. "There is," I admitted quietly. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone peeking from behind the basement door. He immediately ducked out of sight, confirming what I already suspected. His bathroom emergency had been an act so he could spy on us. Typical Dre. Hayden finally looked up, nervous in a way I didn't understand. "WL," he said hesitantly, "who is it?" "You're going to be really surprised," I warned. "Just don't freak out." "I won't," Hayden promised, offering a small smile. Silence stretched between us, longer than it should have. My mind raced. I wanted to tell him everything, but the fear of saying it alone held me back. I wanted Xander with me when the truth came out. It just felt safer that way. So I chose the easier path. "I'll tell you another time," I whispered. "We've got an eavesdropper." Hayden snapped his head toward the door. Dre stepped out with his hands behind his back, whistling dramatically as if he'd just returned from an actual bathroom break. "I already saw you, Dre," I said, laughing. "You don't have to pretend." Dre sighed, slumping his shoulders. "You guys are no fun." Hayden chuckled. "What do you mean?" "It was finally getting interesting," Dre said, flopping down beside me again. Before long, Hayden's mom called us upstairs, and we were met with a full spread of food prepared by her fiancé, Brian. Dinner was warm, lively, and exactly what I needed. It had been a while since I'd spent time with Hayden like this. When it was time to leave, Dre stepped outside first, as he always did, leaving Hayden and me alone for a moment. I smiled at him, and unexpectedly, he pulled me into a hug. I returned it awkwardly but sincerely. When we stepped apart, he had a soft smile on his lips. We said our goodbyes, and then Dre and I ordered an Uber back to campus. Back in my dorm, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted. I stared at my phone, wondering where Xander was and what he was doing. I didn't want to be the clingy boyfriend, but the curiosity and worry wouldn't let me rest. Eventually, I gave in and tapped his contact. After a few rings, he answered, his voice slow and slurred. "Jasper," he drawled. I sat up, feeling Dre's eyes on me. He was always eager to know everything. "Hey," I said gently. "How are you?" Around him, loud voices filled the background. "What's up, my man?" Xander said with a tipsy laugh. "Nothing much," I said, trying not to sound concerned. "How's everything over there?" "It's wild," he answered, still laughing. A small sting of jealousy settled in my chest. It was probably unreasonable, but I felt it anyway. "Kaysen wants to say hi," he added. My chest tightened. A moment later, another voice spoke into the phone. "Hey, little guy." I froze. That voice, I recognized immediately. "Kaysen." Hello," I said, feeling heat rush through my body. "Your friend's pretty drunk right now," Kaysen said casually. I took a breath, keeping my tone calm. "Well, maybe you can help him slow down?" "Sure," he replied. But what he said next made my stomach twist. He's really cute when he gets like this. Chapter 9. My stomach twisted, and I gritted my teeth as I asked, "Where are you?" Kaysen laughed, and to my surprise, he told me the name of the bar where Xander was hanging out with his high school friends. I had never done something so reckless in my life, but for the second time that day, I got an Uber and made my way to the bar where Xander was clearly having too much to drink. I stormed through the front door, which slammed behind me, and made my way toward the back where I figured they'd be around a pool table. I froze when I saw Kaysen, his arm draped over Xander's shoulders, a lazy grin on his face. Xander leaned into him, unsteady, and Kaysen's light blue eyes flicked up to meet mine. His grin widened when he realized I was there. I pressed my lips together and rushed over, pulling Xander's arm toward me. Kaysen released him, and Xander slumped into my chest, his arms dangling behind my shoulders. I struggled slightly to support him, and Kaysen watched with an amused expression. Xander hadn't looked up until he whispered softly in my ear, "Jasper." I bit my lip and adjusted him so he was standing next to me, draping his arm across my shoulder. "Let's go," I said, glancing up and spotting a familiar face. Rocco, my partner from the pool game, approached and frowned. "Sorry he got so drunk," Rocco said, hand behind his neck. I told him to slow down, but that kid, he gestured at Kaysen, kept buying him drinks. "Thanks for trying," I said, keeping my voice steady as Xander remained quiet. Then I turned my attention to Kaysen, giving him a glare I didn't know I was capable of. "You should be looking out for him, not letting him get like this," I said firmly. "He's an adult," Kaysen replied, crossing his arms. "He should know his limits." I shook my head in frustration and refused to argue further. As I turned to leave with Xander, someone tugged my arm. I turned to see Rocco letting go of me. "Need a ride?" he asked, quickly adding, "Don't worry, I didn't drink." Grateful, I accepted so I wouldn't need another Uber and made a mental note to finally get my car fixed. I helped Xander into the back seat and slid in beside him. His head fell on my shoulder, and I ran my fingers through his hair as he sighed. Rocco drove in comfortable silence, and when we arrived at my dorm, I thanked him, patting the back of his seat. He simply nodded and smiled before driving off. With some effort, I got Xander into my room and laid him on my bed. I placed a plastic bag nearby, just in case. Dre jumped up, eyes wide. "What's he doing here?" he asked. "Look at him," I said. "He's completely out of it right now." I knew Xander shouldn't go home like this. Hadley might see him in this state. I searched for his phone and found it in his pocket, but as I reached down, his hand grabbed mine. "What are you doing?" he asked, eyes slowly opening. "I'm calling Paisley," I said, holding out his phone. "Why?" he asked, frowning. "To let her know you're staying here tonight," I replied. "Now hurry." He struggled to sit up and handed me the phone. Moments later, his cheeks bulged as he looked nauseated. I quickly shoved the bag toward him, and he vomited into it. I muttered, turning away. "You," Dre groaned. After Xander finished, I disposed of the bag in the hallway trash and returned to his phone. I quickly found Paisley's contact and called. "Xander?" she asked. "Where are you?" "It's Jasper," I said calmly. "What?" she asked. "I'm calling to let you know he's staying with me tonight," I explained. "Don't tell me he's wasted," she exclaimed. "He's fine," I lied. "We need to study for our exam in the morning." "Exam?" Xander muttered. I waved him off gently. Dre placed a hand over Xander's mouth, whispering, "Shh." Paisley cursed softly and hung up. "Sorry you have to deal with this too," I said to Dre, pushing Xander gently toward the bed and climbing in beside him. "Don't worry, Jasp," Dre said, settling back in. "Just don't get too cozy on me." I laughed. "We won't." Xander shifted closer and draped an arm across my chest, resting his head near mine. I stared at the ceiling, frustrated with Kaysen for enabling him. But then Xander whispered softly, right into my ear. "I love you." Chapter 10. Days had passed since the incident with Xander and Kaysen, and I found myself lying on my bed on a quiet Saturday morning with no plans. It was still early, maybe around 7, but Dre was already busy getting ready, stepping into jeans and putting on a nice shirt. I sat up, yawned, and stretched my arms high. "Where are you going?" I asked through a yawn. Dre snickered as he adjusted his glasses. "I'm going to see my beautiful May." "At her house?" I asked. He said with a smile. "I get to meet her parents too." "You sound excited about that," I said, grinning. "Of course I am," Dre replied. "I'm sure they're wonderful people." I wished him luck as he slipped out the door. Saturdays were usually our day to hang out, and now that he had left, I wasn't sure what to do. Xander usually spent the day taking Hadley out, and Hayden had work. Still, I decided to call Xander, knowing I'd be bored without him. He picked up after a few rings. "Hello," his voice was raspy and tired. "Hey, it's me," I said. Xander yawned. "Why are you calling so early?" "Oh, sorry," I said, suddenly realizing the hour. "Go back to sleep." "No," Xander said. "I'm up." "What's up? Do you have plans today?" I asked. "I'm taking Hadley to the park, I think," he said. "Why? Mind if I come?" I asked. "Of course not," he said. "I'll pick you up in an hour." An hour later, Xander arrived at my dorm, and I hopped into the passenger seat. I smiled at Hadley, her hair tied back in two playful ponytails and her outfit all pink. She smiled back and I turned to Xander. "Who did her hair? It looks really cute." Xander grinned. "I did." "Really?" I asked, impressed. "I'm her dad," he shrugged as he drove. "I've got to learn how to do things for her." I nodded, still amazed. I couldn't imagine having a child at my age, yet Xander handled it so naturally. After about 10 minutes, we arrived at the park. Xander unbuckled Hadley and swung her into his arms. He tickled her stomach lightly and she giggled, trying to wiggle away. I watched them with a smile as Xander set Hadley down. Her stubby legs carried her to the sand pit, where she plopped down and began playing. Xander and I took a seat on the brick wall overlooking her. Soon, a little boy her age wandered over and sat beside her. "Build castle?" he asked in a high-pitched voice. Hadley smiled and nodded, and together, the two of them began working on a sandcastle. "Daddy?" Hadley looked up at Xander, eyes wide. "Yeah, Hadley?" Xander replied, hopping down from the wall. I crouched beside them as well. "Help," she said, fiddling with the sand. Xander laughed and grabbed a pail. "Like this?" he said, patting down the sand in the bucket, flipping it over and waiting a moment. Slowly lifted up and... The sand held its shape perfectly, and Hadley gasped while the boy clapped. "Do it again," she cheered. Xander looked at me and handed me the bucket. "Jasper is going to help you," he said. I hesitated, then smiled. "Okay, let's do this." The children helped scoop the sand into the bucket, and together we created another part of the castle. Their laughter and cheers filled the air, and Xander and I exchanged proud smiles. About an hour later, the little boy's mother came over and introduced herself. Her son was named Alex, just turned 3. She thanked us for helping the kids get along and saved Xander's number to arrange future playdates. When she saw us together, she assumed we were babysitting. Xander explained that he was Hadley's father, and the woman turned to me. I introduced myself as Jasper, and Xander quietly added that we were together. Her warm smile eased my nerves. "Beautiful," she said. "It's clear you both care deeply for her." "Thank you," Xander said, pulling Hadley close. Alex waved goodbye to Hadley, and the two shared a quick hug before it was time to leave. Once Hadley was safely buckled into her car seat, she drifted off to sleep. Xander and I whispered to each other, careful not to wake her, and soon arrived back at my dorm. As I unbuckled my seatbelt, Xander caught my arm. "Hey," he said softly. Leaning closer, he pressed his lips gently to mine. I kissed him back, and when we pulled away, he grinned. "Thanks for coming, Jasper." Chapter 11. Reassurance is a powerful thing when you feel uncertain. It's especially meaningful when you don't want to bring up sensitive topics that might make you seem clingy. When reassurance comes without asking for it, you learn to treasure that person. There's a difference between asking for reassurance and receiving it naturally. For me, Xander's quiet reminders that our bond is strong help me push thoughts of Kaysen aside. at least for a while. Because whenever Xander meets his friends, Kaysen will be there, and the uneasiness in my chest will always return. It was a Tuesday morning, and I walked into the science building with Dre. As we approached our usual seats in the lecture hall, I noticed Hayden sitting there already. That was unusual. He usually arrives just a few minutes before class, while Dre always gets there early. We slid in beside him, leaving him in the middle, and he smiled at us. "You're early," I said, rummaging through my backpack. "Yeah," he replied. "I actually don't mind this class too much." Dre raised an eyebrow. "You don't? Is it because you get to sit next to the most handsome guy in here?" Hayden's cheeks flushed, and Dre doubled over laughing. "I'm talking about myself," Dre said, wiping his eyes. "Is there someone else you had in mind, perhaps?" Hayden sighed and buried his face in his hands. I reached over and patted his shoulder. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Dre's words must have shocked you. Everyone knows I'm the most handsome after all." "Jasper," Dre said, "you're an idiot." "I know that. I struggle with school, Dre," I replied. "See? I'm not talking about school," he said, shaking his head. I was confused, but Hayden lifted his head and suggested a change of topic. "Do you both want to come over tonight?" he asked. "I've already invited Xander and a few others." "You did?" That's surprised. "Is Xander going?" "Yeah," Hayden said. "And so are the others." The professor walked in then, and Dre whispered to me, "We'll go," giving a confident nod. Hayden smiled, and we turned our attention to the lecture. The class dragged on, and I found myself doodling more than taking notes. By the time it ended, I stretched, packed up, and prepared for the rest of the day, though my thoughts were still clouded. As we left the building, Hayden glanced up at the sky before turning to me. "Xander asked if he could bring someone tonight," he said. I froze, and Dre stopped too, though unintentionally. "He did." I stuttered. "Yeah," Hayden replied. "Apparently he had plans with the kid and asked if they could both come to my house instead." "Who's the kid?" I asked, dreading the answer. "I'm not sure," Hayden said, scratching his chin. "Maybe Kaysen." My stomach sank. I forced myself to keep walking. I didn't know what Xander and Kaysen had planned, but I knew I couldn't interfere. It wasn't my place. And if I did, Xander would probably be upset. The rest of the day passed slowly, and when I returned to my dorm, I collapsed onto my bed. Dre was at his desk as usual and looked up. "Jasp," he asked, concern in his voice. "Are you okay?" I exhaled. It's just Kaysen. I don't trust him." "He's been spending a lot of time with Xander, huh?" Dre asked. I told him about Xander's drunken night a few days ago and about my first impressions of Kaysen. Dre agreed something seemed off. "I know Xander wouldn't do anything behind my back now that we're together," I said. "You're dating Xander?" Dre's eyes widened. "Since when?" "I hadn't told you," I said with a small smile. "No, Jasp," he said, grinning. "But being the great god of love that I am, I kind of guessed something was going on between you two." "Yeah, that's why I'm uneasy about Kaysen," I admitted. "I've got your back," Dre said. "If he tries anything, I'll handle it." I laughed. "I'm sure you will." Dre nodded and returned to his work. Hours passed, and I still hadn't done much. My mind was too clouded to focus on homework, so I stared at the ceiling instead. By evening, it was time to head to Hayden's house. Dre and I got ready and soon arrived. Hayden greeted us at the door and led us to the basement, which was already crowded with familiar faces from campus. I immediately scanned for Xander and froze when I saw him at a pool table. My fists clenched as I noticed Kaysen standing opposite him. As I approached, Kaysen glanced up, then smirked at me. "Glad you could make it," he said. Chapter 12. Xander slowly lifted his head from the pool table and smiled, his green eyes shining. I forced a smile of my own, though my lips quivered with frustration. I hadn't responded to Kaysen, and Hayden walked over, looking between the three of us. "You know him?" Hayden asked, glancing at Kaysen. "Unfortunately," I mumbled. Kaysen's grin widened as he stepped closer. "You're just upset that your boyfriend spends more time with me than you," he teased, tapping my chest lightly. My mouth dropped open. Xander missed his shot. Dre froze. Hayden looked at me, eyes wide. What? He doesn't know? Kaysen laughed. Kaysen, Xander said slowly, trying to keep calm. Enough. Kaysen held up his hands, still smirking. What does he mean? Hayden asked, searching my eyes. Boyfriend? I clenched my teeth and grabbed Hayden's wrist, pulling him toward the stairs. Xander shot a sharp look at Kaysen before following us. Dre stood alone in the basement for a moment, but remembering his promise to me, he pursed his lips and stormed over to Kaysen. What? Kaysen asked. Step aside, Dre muttered, giving him a firm push, enough to make it clear he wasn't joking. Meanwhile, Hayden, Xander, and I huddled in the living room. I rubbed the back of my neck, nervous. I hadn't planned on telling Hayden yet, but Kaysen had forced my hand. What are you doing up here? Hayden asked, glancing at Xander. Xander muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. Look, I said with a sigh, I'm sorry I kept this from you for so long. Me too, Xander added, glancing at Hayden. You too? Hayden asked, clearly confused. I took a deep breath, meeting Hayden's eyes as my palms grew sweaty. We're dating, I said, gently nudging Xander's arm. You are? Hayden's eyes dropped to the floor. Since when? I hesitated. Over a month. Hayden stayed quiet for a moment, and my heart ached. I hated that such an important part of my life had been hidden from my best friend. Finally, he looked up and offered a small smile. Okay, he said. I didn't even notice. Xander exhaled. We didn't mean to hide it, but relationships can be complicated. Not everyone is accepting of a gay couple. Hayden nodded. I understand. Thanks for telling me. It must have been hard. Xander agreed. Hayden's smile widened, and I felt my tension ease. Congratulations, he said. I wish you both the best. Thank you, I said, smiling back at him. Xander echoed my thanks, and I finally felt able to relax. Xander headed back to the basement, and I turned to follow, but Hayden caught my hand. I looked down, raising an eyebrow. Yeah? I asked. He let go quickly, looking at the floor. It's just, no, I'll tell you later, he murmured. Okay, I said. You can tell me anything you know. I know, Hayden said. But it can wait. I smiled, and we returned to the basement, where my eyes inevitably met Kaysen's light blue ones. It's not your place to out people, I said sharply. Just because my boyfriend cares about me doesn't mean he cares about you. It was petty, but Kaysen had pushed me to my limit. I know, Kaysen said with a chuckle. Xander already told me off. I glanced at Xander, who gave me a small nod. Good, I said, sinking into the couch. And your friend over there? He definitely made an impression, Kaysen said, glancing at Dre. Dre smirked and folded his arms. No way, I said, incredulous. I told you I'd handle it, Dre said proudly. My pride still hurts, Kaysen muttered, glaring at him. I laughed and draped an arm around Dre's shoulders. Thanks, I said, giving him a light squeeze. Hayden stayed quiet, seemingly lost in thought. The basement grew lively as the rest of his friends arrived, but he seemed distracted, almost upset. Before leaving, I lingered behind and said goodbye to Xander. He wrapped me in a tight hug, and I breathed in his familiar scent, holding onto him for a moment before he let go, smiling. Dre excused himself to the bathroom, and I decided not to question his timing. I turned to Hayden. Is something bothering you? No, he said. Sorry, my head isn't really in the game right now. But what did you want to tell me earlier? I pressed gently. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. Remember when I asked if you were interested in anyone? Yeah, I said. I was planning to tell you who I liked, but you never asked, he admitted. Oh, I murmured. You had your eye on someone? Well, now it's complicated, he said. But who is it? I asked, leaning in. Hayden studied me for a moment, then whispered so softly I had to listen closely. You. Chapter 13. A day passed. Then 2. 3 went by, and I still hadn't spoken to Hayden about his confession. It had completely caught me off guard. The boy I once had feelings for finally reciprocated, but far too late. And I felt a pang of pity for him. Hayden seemed to understand that I couldn't return the same feelings anymore, and he let me leave his home without any awkward tension. "It's fine now," he said quietly. "Just keep being the great friend you are. We'll move on from here." I didn't know how to respond. Anything I said might have revealed the pity I felt, and I didn't want to hurt him. So I nodded, said a simple goodbye, and left him to his thoughts. Dre and I waited for our Uber in the cold night. I exhaled, watching a cloud of breath drift into the air. "I said I wanted to see drama," Dre said, "but I didn't mean that much." "I know," I replied as the Uber pulled up. Once inside, Dre turned to me. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I just feel bad for keeping such a secret from him." Dre patted my shoulder. "At least he knows now. Let it go." "I guess," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Cheer up, Jasp," Dre said with a grin. "Things will work out. Cupid knows that for a fact." I laughed. "Thanks. We'll see about that." The next day, I woke to a text from Xander. Hadley missed me and he invited me over that evening. I smiled, quickly replying that I'd be there. After a long day, I arrived at his house around 8. Xander opened the door, his grin wide, eyes shining as they met mine. "Hi," I said, smiling nervously. He didn't take his eyes off me at first, and I awkwardly realized how much I was drawn to him. But then a little tug at his pants reminded him of Hadley. He scooped her up with ease and she giggled, making me grin at their playful interaction. Xander led me into the kitchen, where his aunt was cooking, and carefully placed Hadley into her high chair. He helped his aunt prepare dinner as I sat beside Hadley. "Hi," I said. Her bright green eyes mirrored Xander's, and she smiled shyly, showing a few teeth. Xander chuckled, knowing I was a little awkward around children. Dinner was soon ready. As we began eating, the front door opened again, and a girl entered the kitchen, frowning. I rolled my eyes slightly, sensing her annoyance. "Why is he here again?" Paisley groaned, taking a seat across from me. "Paisley," Xander said patiently, "you don't have to be rude every time." She huffed and filled her plate. After dinner, Xander asked her to help take Hadley upstairs to bed. She had beds in both Paisley's and Xander's rooms, so she spent the night with her mom that evening. Once the girl left, Xander led me upstairs to his bedroom and closed the door behind us. I backed up until the edge of his bed stopped me, and I sank down onto it, looking up at him. He leaned in closer, his hands resting lightly on either side of me. I reached up and brushed my thumb along his cheek. "Jasper," he whispered. "Yeah?" I asked softly. "You drive me crazy," he admitted, his gaze locked on mine. I smiled and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, feeling my chest flutter. He leaned closer, and we shared a gentle, lingering kiss, savoring the closeness. We stayed there, holding each other, letting the comfort of our bond speak louder than any words. I wrapped my arms around him, and he smiled down at me. "Thanks for being here, Jasper," he said softly. I grinned back. "Always." Chapter 14. Finally, it was Friday, and I received some of the best news in a while. Kaysen wouldn't be at the bar tonight. Xander had invited some of his old high school friends, including Rocco, along with me, Dre, and Hayden. By 10 o'clock, the bar was bustling, people chatting, music playing loudly, and a small scuffle breaking out outside. Nothing unusual. We claimed our usual spot by the pool table and got comfortable, chatting and laughing. Rocco hadn't ordered anything to drink and told us he'd drive everyone home later, which I appreciated. I sat across from Xander and Hayden, with Dre beside me. Despite the awkward tension between Hayden and me, we did our best to act normal in front of everyone else. My heart belonged to Xander, and he knew that it wouldn't change. After a while, the topic of Kaysen came up. I asked why he couldn't make it tonight. "He had other obligations," Xander said. I didn't complain. "He doesn't seem like a very nice guy," Hayden remarked, resting his elbows on the table. Xander shrugged. "I don't know what's going on with him. He wasn't always like this." "He's just trying to stir trouble," Dre added. I knew more than anyone that Kaysen had an interest in Xander, and that's why he'd been acting out. I didn't want to bring it up, though. I talked to him, Xander said. He apologized and I told him it wasn't enough. So he promised he wouldn't bother anyone anymore. I whispered under my breath, unconvinced, and Xander raised an eyebrow at me. I quickly looked away, and the conversation ended when Rocco arrived. Rocco smiled and greeted everyone. "How's everyone doing?" "We're good," Xander replied. "How's your game going?" Rocco laughed. "My losing streak continues." Hayden and Rocco shook hands, and Hayden did the same with Dre. "Anyone want to play?" Rocco asked. "I need a partner to help me break this streak." I knew I wasn't the best choice, and Dre looked away, whistling nervously. Xander nudged Hayden. "Show em what you've got." Hayden shook his head. "I'm not that great." Rocco grinned. "Neither am I. Let's just try." He waved Hayden over, who hesitated before standing. "If we win," Hayden said, "you all are buying me a drink." "Geez," I muttered. "Hope you lose for your sake." Hayden laughed. "We'll see." The two of them walked to the pool table, leaving the rest of us behind. "He's a nice guy," Dre observed, and I nodded. "Yeah," Xander agreed. "Rocco's like a big brother to all of us. We really look up to him." "Then Hayden's in good hands," I said, and Xander smiled. Watching the game, I was surprised to see Hayden smiling. He was clearly enjoying himself, and I realized how good he was at pool. A minor slip made him frown, and Rocco nudged him playfully. "It's fine," Rocco said with a grin. "No worries." After a few more shots, it was clear that Rocco and Hayden had lost, though Rocco put an arm around Hayden's shoulder. "We'll get them next time," Rocco said. "Gotta break the streak somehow." Back at the table, Hayden and I exchanged a small smile. I was glad to see him getting along so well with Rocco. As the night went on, I felt myself growing tired. I stretched and yawned, and Dre did the same. "Sleepy?" Xander asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm ready to go." "Me too," Rocco said, looking for his keys. "I'll drive you guys home." We said our goodbyes to the rest of the group and headed to Rocco's car. Hayden took the passenger seat, while Xander, Dre, and I went to the back. On the way, Xander slipped his hand into mine and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Don't get out yet," he whispered as Dre opened the door. I turned toward him, smiling. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I won't." Dre looked back into the car and grinned. "You two have fun," he teased. I laughed. "Always." Chapter 15. I awoke the next morning to the comforting weight of Xander beside me, his arm draped across my back. I didn't dare move, not wanting to wake him. I could have stayed like that all day. Soon, his alarm went off, and he groaned, slowly opening his eyes. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. He reached up and gently placed a finger on my lips, then tucked his head into my neck, pulling me closer. I wrapped my arm around him, savoring the quiet moment together. It was the best part of my morning. Eventually, we both got out of bed and began getting ready for the day. I stepped into the bathroom briefly and returned to Xander's room to change. He had already removed his shirt, and I caught myself staring before realizing he was smirking. Stepping closer, he said, "Jasper?" "Huh?" I asked. "You can't look at me like that and expect me not to notice," he teased. I laughed, rolling my eyes, and we exchanged playful glances, teasing one another like we always did. After getting ready, we headed downstairs to join the rest of the house. Paisley was busy taking care of Hadley, and Xander bent down to kiss his daughter on the head. "Good morning," he said, smiling. Hadley's face lit up as she returned his smile. Paisley sighed as she hugged her brother, shielding her face from me. "You're here again," she said, frowning slightly. "Yeah," I replied casually, shrugging. "Why?" she asked, rolling her eyes. "Because I want to be Paisley," I answered, grinning. Her mouth dropped open, and Xander couldn't hide his laughter. "All right, you two," Xander said, stepping in. "Let's just eat breakfast in peace, please." Paisley huffed but took her seat, and we all settled down around the table. Suddenly, my phone rang. I glanced down and froze when I saw who it was. "Hi, Dad," I said. "Hey, Jasper," he replied. "What are you doing today?" I thought for a moment. It was Saturday, so Xander was probably planning something with Hadley. Not sure yet, I said. But what's up? Nothing, he said. I was wondering if you wanted to come by. I'd like to meet your boyfriend. My eyes darted to Xander, who raised an eyebrow. I started. We'll see. I think he might be busy today. I'm not, Xander said with a grin. You're talking about me, right? I laughed. Okay, we'll see what we can do, I told my dad, ending the call. Later that day, we arrived at my house. Xander and I held Hadley's hands as she stumbled up the stairs, giggling the whole way. I rang the doorbell and my father opened it with a wide smile. He pulled me in for a hug and then turned his attention to Xander. Xander extended his hand politely. I'm Xander, he said warmly. My father smiled back. Nice to meet you. Please take care of my son. Of course, Xander replied. Suddenly, my dad's eyes widened as they fell on Hadley. You have a kid? He asked, looking between me and the little girl. I chuckled nervously, preparing to explain the situation. Thanks for listening to today's BL story. If it made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Only here on BL Stories, where love knows no limits.